Artistic director Ari Roth was the pulse of Theater J since 1997, until his quick dismissal on December 18, 2014. Since then, he has reinvented himself, forming his own theater called the Mosaic Theater Company, which will have its inaugural season next fall at the Atlas Performing Arts Center in Washington, D.C. I had the chance to speak with Ari Roth at his office at the Atlas Performing Arts Center. We discussed issues pertaining to Theater J, as well as his new endeavor, the Mosaic Theater Company. How did you find out that you got fired? Take me back to that moment. What were you feeling?
Well, no, I mean, it was just happened on a Thursday morning on December 18th. I came in for a meeting that was ostensibly to coordinate talking points for an interview the next day with the Washington Jewish Week, a joint interview. I had no idea that the Carol, together with the president of the JCC and the head of the personnel committee, and most certainly some lawyers consulting with the JCC, had been working, to put together this termination, the separation agreement, this press release, what have you. So they just decided to make an abrupt rupture. At the start of the new year, I think there were reasons for them to want to reboot with the new year. There's a new director of institutional giving coming on, a new capital campaign. They wanted to get started and get rid of the distraction that was my increasingly embattled relationship with the JCC executive.
Was it rocky before Carol, or has this been an ongoing issue with the DC JCC?
Well, since 2009, with the advent of this group, Citizens Opposed to Propaganda Masquerading as Art, which had a whole website dedicated to wanting to remove me as artistic director because of what they felt were tough plays on Israel that were not in line with the messaging that they wanted sent out from the established Jewish community. So, there was back and forth with the previous CEO, who I respected a lot and I consider a warm, nurturing person, but who also was a formidable supervisor when she felt that the JCC's interests were endangered with a public controversy. And it was like one controversy after another. If it wasn't Theater J has a post-show panel that involves a Palestinian American who may have said something in the press, 3 years earlier here, or is associated with this group there. There was another thing to criticize, our appearing at a J Street conference and talking about culture as a tool for change, and J Street was seen as a sort of outlier organization on the Israel advocacy, horizon. So we got involved in controversies that were increasingly aggravating for the CEO to have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And I was proud to be at the J Street conference. It's a hugely important new organization that we wanted to be with and to support. It was a good affinity partnership. But everybody didn't feel that way. And so there was my enthusiasm and my vision colliding with a kind of caution and a sense of, whoa, we don't know whether you should be associated with this group or not. Mm-hmm. So yes, there was some contentiousness before, and that was all part of doing what I felt was important and envelope pushing work within a liberal-minded Jewish community center, but one whose liberalism certainly had its limits.
Okay. Well, let's talk about another sensitive subject. Let's talk about JCC's decision to cancel Theater J's annual theatrical festival, Voices from a Changing Middle East. Did the JCC involve you at all in the decision process and the cancellation, or were you kept in the dark?
Well, it was a surprise. I mean, I didn't know that cancellation of the festival was in the minds of the JCC. In a way, because it was successful, because and certainly the last festival that we had, featuring Moti Lerner's The Admission, Tova Feldshuh's performance in Golda's Balcony, a couple stage readings around that, and a variety of discussions, we were looking at a very financially remunerative, hugely popular, critically hailed festival, and that was building on previous years of success of that festival. Now, I recognized that there was growing concern about the Kapma lobbying campaign, and anytime we brought up the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and tried to introduce a dialectic, an argument on stage, or a well-curated conversation after a show that gave voice to opposing points of view, there were questions as to whether that was within the mission of a Jewish community center. Of course, so many of us thought, of course it is, to be Talmudic and disputatious and to look at many sides of an issue, even if sometimes that issue was a non-Jewish point of view being expressed within a Jewish assembly. Why not? That's exactly what our theater was providing. But there was a growing, as Carol might say, growing philosophical difference between her vision of what a JCC wanted to be presenting and promoting at this moment in time and what mine was. She's the CEO. I was a supervisee. I didn't like to behave like a supervisee because I took artistic director to be an important title. But within the overall flow chain, I was definitely underneath the CEO and the leadership of the board, and I chafed at having that artistic vision and that sense of what the theater needed to contribute to this moment in time. I was, I wrestled with my own role as a subordinate. So the accusations of insubordination, I grant that they were, they're accurate.
Okay. Now, with your new theater company, Mosaic Theater Company, are you thinking about producing something similar to the Voices from a Changing Middle East Festival?
Yes. I mean, I was given permission early on. With the cancellation of the festival, the president of the JCC and the CEO said, you can have your festival. We don't want to hold on to it. It's yours to go with, grow with, take its history, take the future. That's yours. And I want to hold on to that. It means a lot. So I see that as continuing. But again, the context of that festival now falls into a larger intercultural mission of bringing different communities together to encounter each other and to look at the past together, look at the present, negotiate the future together.
Okay. How will Mosaic be different from Theater J and other similar theater companies?
We carry with it this unique origin story of coming out of a progressive Jewish cultural producing base. So I am taking a piece of my history at Theater J with me. No other theater can claim that kind of origin, and so we're taking a piece, a vision that was rooted on 16th and Q Street, that's no longer, alas, welcomed at 16th and Q, and moving that out to the other side of town. And now the context of the H Street corridor, Capitol Hill, everything that is developing and relevant here, and again, I'm just finding out about my new community here, we see not within an organized Jewish community structure, but within a teeming and diverse arts constellation here, how our vision is what's the word? Marinate, how it marinates, and it all gets spiced up with the influences and interests, concerns of where we are right here, right now. So I think we're going to have a diverse set of offerings. We're going to have a diverse staff. We're going to have diverse leadership. That range of multi and interculturalism will influence the work in ways that are quite different from what we were doing at Theater J.
Okay. Now, Mosaic is a nonprofit, and you will likely have donors and board members and grants. How can your theater be organized as such that the situations that occurred at Theater J won't happen at Mosaic?
Well, I've had those very, beautiful conversations with the leadership here at Mosaic. Jane Lang, who is the sort of the founder of the at the Atlas Theater, and Doug Ewell, the new executive director of the Atlas Theater, who have welcomed me and Mosaic in, and they say, well, like the JCC, we are a multiplex. You know, we have multiple businesses happening here, but Atlas is just a vessel. There is no curatorial control. They've invited in arts partners who have a commitment to social justice, and so they smile upon what we're doing, but there will be no involvement in setting up restrictions about what kind of content we produce. Mm-hmm. With a board of directors that we're essentially hiring, though we hope not to go through this a cookie cutter mold for bringing people in and having the annual benefit and the annual campaign and the fundraising drives. Perhaps we can, at this moment, knowing what we know and consulting with who we've consulted with, we can create some kind of original structures that will help this theater be something new, create a more perfect kind of community. I hope to have a staff that will work with me in a really cooperative way, which of course that's not going to be different from the best values and everything we aspire to do at Theater J. I just think we may wind up having a healthier climate or environment in which we're not having battles of who really sets the artistic vision. I think there'll be a more holistic execution of how vision turns into reality, and so the hope is that we create a little bit more of a cleaner infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. What critical work will Mosaic set out to accomplish?
What do you mean by critical work?
Obviously, being a playwright, you have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
And since you're starting Mosaic, you're in a new facility, you're under new guidance, a new culture here. I'm sure you have something that you want to say that perhaps you couldn't say at DCJCC.
Well, I will say I felt very free. Until this last year at the JCC, I felt like I was trying to program in as rich and as full a way as possible. So I didn't feel like I was holding back. I feel like my workload may have retarded my own, expressiveness as a playwright. But that's just on me, other than being told, oh, you can't do this play as part of your season, which was, again, a very recent development and an outlier event to 17 years of some really, extraordinary opportunities for me. I hope to, well, I guess I could say I will listen to the issues on the street more closely than ever before. I think the sense of a community where something is being grown here, and yet something can be lost at the same time, that families, individuals risk being displaced here in ways that have happened in many gentrifying areas. But there's a kind of crisis point in DC right now as we're looking at the changing profile of this city. Where do people go when they're pushed out? Just by virtue of real estate prices and a changing climate in the neighborhood. There's a lot of activism and awareness going on here of how we keep housing more affordable for the people who want to stay here. And that's a really interesting issue to talk about displacement and see how that resonates historically, and not only in our city but in Europe migrant populations, peoples losing their homes. That's a resonant issue in the Middle East and in Israel as well. So I see the possibilities of having issues that resonate on this block and see us looking at the past, looking at the present internationally and saying, are these phenomenons related at all? Where's that work? Who's writing that work? Who are the performance artists and playwrights who are going out into the community, and who are showing up at neighborhood meetings, who are looking at real estate developers and saying, are you mindful of this? Are you thinking about that? What kind of neighborhood do you want to build? What kind of city do we want to build together? You know, what is 21st century Washington, D.C. going to look like? I don't think that was so much on my radar, you know, at 16th and Q Street. Even though there were a lot of politics at play in DuPont Circle and Shaw in the years I lived there, I didn't have my ear close to the street. And I think I want to do that more here.
Okay. Besides the performances, what other opportunities might Mosaic bring? Any educational outreach or other programs that are in development?
I'm talking to a producer who thinks that there could be a lot of work here inviting in young families for theater. Sort of, you know, perhaps a partnership with one of our many, you know, highly successful family theaters working in town, like Adventure Theater or Imagination Stage. There's huge opportunities for that kind of theater in this building. That's not something I have a tremendous amount of expertise in, but I'm enthusiastic about sharing space when there's space to go around and when there's opportunities for reaching families that otherwise would not find the theater relevant for them. This may be the time when Ari Roth says yes to children's theater in a way that I never really have before. But the context is changing for me, and so to open myself up to a whole other programming stream that could really bring young families in here, or grandparents and the grandchildren in here, could be really interesting in a way of getting, like we saw in the lobby today, you know, kids singing in the lobby together with a singer-songwriter. We weren't expecting to see that, but that's what's happening at the Atlas. It reminded me of it must have reminded you of what happens at the JCC. It's a multi-use facility, and it should be filled with young people during the day who have a bedtime of 8 o'clock at night. They're not going to be going to the theater, but reach them while they're awake and get them to feel at home in a theater. I think that's nice, and that may be a growth industry for us here too.
If you don't mind, I would like to talk about one of the big current events going on. The recent events that happened with the comic artist and their publication. Can anyone ever take art too far?
What an interesting question. You know, I will say that there's a great book coming out in May by a close friend, somebody I've looked up to for years, David Shipler, who's writing a book called Freedom of Speech, Mightier Than the Sword. It's published by Knopf. The last 3 chapters in it are devoted to looking at Theater J and the rocky times it's been through, the achievements that it's made, its contributions to free speech within the greater Washington, D.C., and community, and inviting so many different communities to be part of a community center dialogue about current events as dramatized on a stage, and sort of reflecting on the dramas as they relate to life right now. And, you know, even David Shipler, and he sent me the corrected proofs yesterday, and we were talking on the phone, and he was saying, you know, this placard, Je suis Charlie, of all of us identifying with this sort of adult National Lampoon-like magazine that was, you know, sticking its finger in the eye of so many sacred cows and so much of organized religion, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, over the years. satire is its own form of radical free speech, and it's free speech that sometimes can wound, and sticks and stones, may break some bones. Well, no, that's the wrong phrase. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I remember saying that. I don't know what that has to do with Je suis Charlie, because they call names. They don't really break bones. But they do feel like they're throwing verbal sticks and stones, and they do wound. And the question is, when does the rhetoric start inflicting a kind of wound that is unacceptable? Now, David Shipler was saying, "Je ne suis Charlie," "Je ne suis pas Charlie." I can be for free speech, but not necessarily ascribe to all of the rhetorical, incendiary messaging that came out of a particular magazine, and that you can feel uncomfortable with using words or images sometimes that go too far. And so you're asking me, is there a time when art and when speech can turn into hate speech? Well, obviously, there is such a thing as mortally offensive speech, and you can understand why in Germany there are prohibitions against Holocaust denial, and prohibitions against displaying a swastika openly. You can understand when given a country's history of racism, and worse, barbarism, and you see the connection between vitriolic hate speech and then hateful actions and murderous actions, you can see how free speech has its limits. You can see how hate speech in America needs to be legislated and needs to be monitored. So we're not all free to do whatever we want or to say whatever we want, but is a work of art free to offend in the context of presenting cultural portraits? Can you say the N-word in a rap song? Can you say the N-word in a movie? Can you say the N-word on stage? You can't really say it in the State of the Union address. That would be lousy to do it. You're not really writing it in journalism. That would be reckless to say, for the New York Times or the Washington Post to use that language. Mm-hmm. But put in quotes in some ways to demonstrate how this language is used in its vernacular for and framing that. If there's a cultural purpose to it, well, obviously it's been used. There's no finer playwright than August Wilson uses speech that you couldn't use in a public, in the New York Times or Washington Post, but uses it on stage for extraordinary impact and verisimilitude to really say, this is who we are, this is how we talk, and this is telling it like it is. So I think we should be free to parse and to be nuanced and to be able to tell the difference between hateful speech that injures and art that contextualizes and presents within a frame and a framework portraits of reality.
Well, Ari, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on art, on Theater J, and your future with Mosaic Theater Company. I really appreciate your time.
Well, and I appreciate you coming down here to 13th and 8th Street. I think we won't be producing until the fall of 2015, but that's sooner than you know it too. So hopefully I'll get some other people to join me in this little office, and we'll start getting about the business of producing some great theater here.